Hello, friends.
Hello.
My name is Joseph. I'm going to sit down for a minute, if it's all right with you. Come a long way to tell you a story. A love story of sorts. It's a story of how God loved us enough to send His Son into the world to save us from our sins. Now, I know you've heard this story many times before, but I'm sure you haven't heard it from my point of view. You see, my role in this story, although very important, was mostly behind the scenes. So you know very little about me. So I come this morning to share this story with you because you see it's the story of my life. It's my testimony. And in that testimony I'm going to share with you not only the story of the birth of God's Son, but I'm going to share with you some of my personal things. Like how I came to fall in love with the most wonderful woman in all the world. And how I came to experience God's grace in a way that changed my life forever and gave my life more meaning than I ever thought was possible. So I want to share some memories with you today, and as I do, I hope that you are as blessed in hearing this story as I am and was in living it. Because it's God's story. It's my story. So let me tell you a little about myself. I was born and raised in the little town of Nazareth in Galilee, and I learned the trade of a carpenter from my father Jacob, who learned it from his father Nathan. And coming up as a young man, I had many of the same dreams and aspirations that I know many of you do. I wanted a successful business and a prosperous life. I wanted a happy home and someone to build that home with. I wanted a good woman to be my wife. And I just wanted a good life. But I knew I was going to have to work really hard if I was going to have the kind of life I wanted, because you see, the Roman occupation made it very difficult for a man like me, a common man, to get ahead. But I worked hard. I was very industrious. And I did okay. I wasn't the wealthiest man in Nazareth, but I was better off than most. And because of this, I guess you could say that I was one of the more eligible bachelors in Nazareth. I may not look like much now, but I used to strike There were, I'll say it without boasting, there were many young women in the area who would have loved to have been my wife. And there were many fathers in the area who would have gladly married their daughters off to me. Now, you may or may not know that marriage in our culture, marriages were arranged affairs for the most part. So there were many marriages where love was not a consideration. Many was a man who married a woman who did not love him, nor did he love. But I wanted more than that out of my marriage. I wanted someone to love, someone to love me. And so I waited. You see, there were certain characteristics, certain qualities that I was looking for in a woman, the woman who would bear my children. I wanted her not only to be physically attractive, which was always a plus, but I wanted her to have a good head on her shoulders. I wanted her to love our nation Israel. I wanted her to love our God Yahweh, and I guess I just wanted her to have a wonderful, loving, and compassionate heart. And so I kept waiting for that one that I knew would come along and be the woman of my dreams and the woman who would help me do all the things I wanted to accomplish. So, and I'll never forget first time I seriously took notice of her. She was there in the marketplace with her mother, and I had watched her grow up from a little girl up into a young woman, the kind of woman I've been talking about. I knew that she came from a good family. They always went to synagogue. They always observed all the holy days. It was obvious that Mary had been raised right. She obeyed her parents. She respected the elders. I remember watching her in synagogue, and she listened to the rabbi intently. Not only was she physically beautiful, but she had all those qualities I've been looking for. And so I started negotiations with her father. And he gave his consent for us to be married, even though Mary was a lot younger than me. But that's the way it was in our culture. Mary was 14, but she was mature and wise beyond her years. At this stage of our marriage, the betrothal, she became my betrothed. At this stage of our marriage, she stayed with her parents. And I would go and visit her. And sometimes we'd sit there around the house, but then other times we'd take walks down through the olive orchards, and we'd sit and we'd talk. Well, in the beginning, I did all the talking, as you might imagine. Imagine that. And Mary would just sit there and smile and be pleasant. I guess she was tolerating me to begin with. She was shy around me. But eventually she warmed to me. And she began to open up, talk with me, and share with me as well. I shared with her my dreams and my hopes for the future, and as she began to share with me, we realized that our desires were the same. And we were what you might call a perfect match. And I fell madly in love with her. And I could tell by the way she looked at me, she felt the same way. Oh, what a wonderful feeling that was. If you've ever been in love, you know what I was feeling. Yeah. The future that I had planned was now more than just some abstract idea or thought or dream. It was becoming a reality. And Mary was right at the center of it. Oh man, I was one very happy and blessed man. All was right with the world. Everything that I did took on new significance. But then something changed. Well, Mary changed. Suddenly she became burdened. Well, maybe burden's not exactly the right word for it. Maybe preoccupied would be a better description of what was going on. When we sat together, she just sat there quietly. She didn't talk. She didn't share with me. And when I talked to her, she seemed to be 1,000 miles away. I began to fear that her affections for me had faded. Maybe she'd even found someone else to love, which at this point would have been a very serious sin because we were betrothed, which means we were actually married, but it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. And then my fear for worsened when she came to me one day and she told me she needed to go visit her cousin Elizabeth, who lived up in the hill country. And I didn't want her to go. For one thing, it wasn't safe for her to go, even though she was going with some other people. And secondly, it just wasn't proper for her to be that far away from me at this stage of our relationship. And I tell you, right then, I wasn't sure where we were going with that. And I told her I didn't want her to go, but she insisted. She said, Joseph, this is something I've got to do. And so against my wishes, she went. And the time that she was gone was so hard for me. My fears grew, and I guess my insecurities grew as well. I didn't see Mary for 3 months until she came back to Nazareth. And one night I heard a knock at my door. And when I opened it, there was Mary. I didn't even know she was back in town, so I was surprised, but I was also excited because here she was, and I reached out to embrace her, but she withdrew. And I said, Mary, what's wrong? And she didn't say anything. I sensed now she was at last ready to tell me what was wrong, what was bothering her. And I tell you, I was afraid. But I asked her in the house. She came in, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. I knew she wanted to tell me, but she just couldn't find the words. So I said, Mary, I know that something's been bothering you, and I've asked you over and over again to tell me. You've got to understand, not knowing is just killing me. And whatever it is, I'll understand and we can work it out. Just tell me what's wrong, please. And then she looked me in the eyes, and with tears in hers. She said, Joseph, first of all, you must remember that I love you more than life itself. But I have something very difficult to tell you, and you've got to hear me out before you say anything. I said, okay, Mary. And then she said, oh, it's child. No, I can't tell you. I can't tell you what I felt when she said that. I was angry. I was confused. I said, Mary, why? How can this be? You and I haven't. Who is he? He's not mine. Who is the father of this child? It certainly isn't mine. And she hesitated, and folks, my mind was racing. I wanted so much for there to be a way out of this. I was hoping so much that this wasn't her fault. And I was hoping that I could do something. I said, Mary, did he force himself on you? Please tell me he did. And if he did, you tell me his name, and I'll deal with him. Mary said, no one forced themselves on me. Oh, and she said that. It was like you kicked me in the stomach and plunged a knife into my heart all at the same time. And if you've ever been hurt by somebody that you love dearly, you know what I was feeling. I mean, here was a woman that I had shared all my most intimate thoughts with, and we had talked about the life we were going to have. We had talked about the children we were going to have. And here she was telling me she was going to have another man's child. At least that's what I thought she was telling me. Again, and I asked her, Mary, who is he? Who is he? And then Mary told me this outrageous story about how an angel had come to visit her and she was going to give birth to the Son of God. And I said, Mary, just how big a fool do you think I am? Isn't it bad enough that you betrayed me by committing adultery? And now you're going to make it worse by committing blasphemy as well? I was so angry with her. She tried to make me understand. She said, Joseph, please. You said you'd understand. Joseph, please, you've got to understand. I am still the virgin that you thought I was. I'm still the woman that you fell in love with. We can still be married. We can still have that life that we wanted together. But this is a calling I've had to answer, and I was depending on you to help me with it. That didn't make sense to me. I was so angry. I went to the door and I jerked it up and I said, Mary, you leave, and you leave now. I don't want to hear any more of this. She said, Joseph, please just don't be this way. Listen, I said, leave now. You've got to give me some time. So Mary started out the door, but just before she disappeared into the night, she turned to me and she looked me right square in the eyes. And she said, Joseph, of all the people in the world, I just knew that you'd love me enough and trust me enough to believe me. But I guess I was wrong. And then she turned and ran away in tears, looking more like a little girl than the courageous woman she proved to be. Well, I slammed the door shut, and I hadn't shed a tear in her presence, but now I fell to my knees in the middle of the room, and I saw bitter tears. Oh God, how could she do this to me? God, how could she do this to me? After all that we have shared and all we meant to each other, how could she do this to me as much as I love her? Gosh. I don't know how long I stayed there like that. But as the night wore on, I came to realize, as I thought about the way Mary looked when she told me her story, that either she really believed that she was giving birth to the Son of God, in which case she was certainly a mad woman, or either she was the best liar I'd ever met in my life. And I didn't know which it was. So I said to myself, Joseph, you cannot marry this woman. Well, the fact remained, however, that I still loved her. And I knew that when word got out that she was with child and unmarried, that she would more than likely be stoned, and I didn't want that to happen. Not to my Mary. And so I decided that rather than make a public spectacle of her, which was my right, I would just divorce her quietly. And I would urge her to leave Nazareth and go where no one knew her. And that night I cried myself to sleep. But you know something? In the night, a miraculous thing happened. It changed everything. I too was visited by an angel. He came to me in a dream that was as vivid as the noonday sun. He came to me and he said, Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit, and she will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Now, I can't describe it the way it was, folks. It was magnificent. It was miraculous. And I can't tell you how I felt when I woke, except that I was still confused about a lot of things, but there were two things that I knew. One was I was elated because the woman that I loved had been telling me the truth the whole time. Mary was innocent, and that meant that she still loved me. That meant that everything that we had wanted, all those things she said we could still have. All those things we dreamed we could still have. I was excited, but then I realized, what did I say last night? And I knew then that I must go and ask her forgiveness. So I ran through the early morning light to her house, and I beat on her door, her father's door, until he came to the door, and at first he wouldn't let me see her. He said, I don't know what's going on between you two, but Mary came home very upset last night, and you just don't need to see her. I said, yes, I do. You just don't understand. I said, you've got to let me see her, and let me see her alone. And so he let me in. And I went to her room, and when I opened her door, Mary was standing on the floor, and her gaze was questioning my intent. She didn't know I was there. I was angry that night before. But then our eyes met, and then somehow she knew. I went over to her, and I fell at her knees, at her feet, on my knees. And I told her about the angel and how the angel had come and how I was so sorry. And I begged her to forgive me. And she said, of course, just like me. And then I reached out and I put my arms around her and pulled her to me. And I placed my head on her belly. And I told her how very precious she was to me. And then Mary reached down, placed her hands on my head with the tenderness of touch that I felt from on her. And I knew then that I would love her forever. So, I obeyed the angel. I took Mary to be my wife, and I wish that I could tell you that it was easy, but it wasn't. We heard the whispers and we endured the rumors. And we knew that everything was going to be okay. We didn't let that bother us, because we knew God was going to support us and protect us because we were in His will. But I will admit that there were times I had my moments with God. And one was when I found out that we were going to have to go to Bethlehem to answer some stupid edict from Caesar for a census. But it angered me that here this was happening, and Mary was almost to term. And I was sure that if we left for Bethlehem, she'd either give birth on the way, she'd most certainly give birth before we could get back home. And so I asked God, I said, God, how much more must Mary endure? How much more must I endure? Here she is, she's almost ready to deliver, and now we've got to travel these 80 miles to Bethlehem across rough terrain. Do you think you could help us out here a little bit? I found out later that that was all in God's plan, but I didn't know it then. So I procured a donkey for Mary to ride, and we left for Bethlehem. And it was tough going. We had to take it easy. It took us several days to get there. When we arrived in Bethlehem, it was late in the evening on that day. And Mary was already having labor pains. And they were coming quicker and quicker. And so I rushed around trying to find us somewhere to stay, but there just wasn't anywhere to stay. There were people sleeping in the streets. And the last place I went, I beat on the door till the man came, and he said, what do you want? I said, listen, we need some help here. I've looked everywhere and there's nowhere left. And he looked at Mary and he took pity on us. He said, listen, I don't have any more rooms left. I've even rented out my own for the night. There's people sleeping everywhere. But I have a stable out back. If you want that, you're welcome to it. And so he led us around to the stable, and there was this little stable. He said, I wish I could do better. And then he left, went back inside to take care of his guests, and left me and Mary there alone. I helped Mary off the donkey and got her in the stable there, and made a bed for her as best I could, and she was in a lot of pain. And her labor pains were coming very quick, very close together. And I don't mind telling you, I was scared. I was afraid. Mary had never given birth before, and I had certainly never delivered a child before. But I did the best I could. I stayed close to her, and I wiped the sweat from her brow with a wet cloth. I held her hand, and I encouraged her. I stayed as close to her, well, let me put it this way, as close as she'd let me stay to her. If you've ever been in that situation, you know what I'm talking about, too. And I try not to let my uneasiness show, but Mary sensed my uneasiness. She knew I was afraid. And she looked up at me, and she said, "Joseph, don't worry. Have you forgotten whose child it is that I carry?" That's the way Mary always was. She was always the one reminding me to have faith. After she had given birth and had nursed him, she wrapped him in some clothes that we had there, some strips of cloth. And then she asked me, "You want home?" And I took him in my arms and I looked down into that beautiful face. And folks, I knew you weren't going to mind. I'll tell you what, it sure seemed like he was. And I sure wanted him. And then as I looked at him, the responsibilities that were mine, him and his mother, just came crushing down on me. So I kissed him on the forehead and handed him back to Mary, and she laid him down in the manger where the hay was. And I tell you what, it's an humbling thought to think that God chose me to be the vessel of provision and protection for his son. He was going to use me to do those things. He was going to use me to protect his son. He was going to use me to provide for him, he's going to use me to raise him. And I tell you what, the thought of it all just, it made me weak in the knees and yes, a little nauseous. So I stepped out of the stable and I looked up into that bright sky and looked up at those stars and that one big star that was shining up there. And I said, "Oh Lord God, why me? Why here?